you're not ovulating, you're not having a cycle, right? So you do that. How many months do you not have a cycle for? And then once you show it, and then you go through a contest prep.
Welcome everybody to a new episode with Astrid, your APD, and I have the pleasure to have for a second time Jamie with me, and she's going to be discussing with me a lot of different things and follow-up questions from our first session that we spoke about female enhancement and PEDs, but also like anything and everything to do with contest prep and getting the best physique for a female athlete. Now, this time I have for you like a bunch of questions that are related to more so peak week and overall just working with a female client, not so much directed to PEDs, although this may come as an additional question, how to deal with clients that are on PEDs versus just natural clients. So the first question that I have for you, Jamie, is around what is the most challenging thing that you have ever encountered when coaching a female client through a fat loss phase?
Wow. Let's see. I think there's like, are we talking towards the end, or are we just talking throughout the whole process of it?
Well, let me give you two scenarios. Like, let me put my example for you. So someone who is doing a very long prep, let's say 36-week prep, versus someone who's doing a very short 12-week prep. What would be the biggest challenges that you find with working with a client during a fat loss phase if they were doing a very long prep versus someone who's doing a short prep?
So I don't tend to have a lot of people that will do a super long prep, like maybe 30 weeks, right? So
Okay.
all of the timing for peak week comes down to building a timeline. So when I onboard a client and I work with them, we build out a timeline, and it's like what's realistic for a like what's a realistic loss, a realistic rate of loss over those, like, so say the goal is 50 weeks from now. It would be like, okay, well, we just need to make sure that, so you're this far out from stage weight, right? If it's someone totally new that's never competed before, then you're kind of guessing. But it's like usually sometimes natural athletes will be 30 weeks because we find that I have to like stretch it out a bit longer than someone who is enhanced, because we don't use lipolytics. Like, we're very limited to what we can use, so it might be 24 weeks. With a super long extended prep, what I find is that females will be like, it's not as gratifying, right? So the rate of loss is really slow, so they're not seeing as rapid of results. So then they can kind of go off the rails because they get demotivated,
Okay.
right? So that would be
Do
one thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you think that's the biggest thing that may come? I have found, you're right. It sort of feels slow, and it kind of feels like you can get a bit complacent because obviously you feel like you are experiencing all these different effects of being in a deficit. You're craving, you're hungry, you're fatigued, you want to push in the gym, you still have to show up and comply with your volume and everything else. But on top of that, you have time, and it feels like, well, one extra bite here and there is not going to hurt because I could just make up for it later on the prep. So I
Yes.
feel like that is another thing that I find, especially like looking at my own example, I have had these thoughts come through and just like, well, just a little bit more wouldn't hurt. I can just squeeze the diet a little bit more intensely as I get closer. But it kind of is a bit of a mind battle. Although I find that it's beneficial to also know that you have the time to allow for you to get some flexibility, and that it's okay to make slight, like small mistakes here and there, because you've got the time, you've given yourself the space to do that versus being too aggressive. So in your experience, what would be then a big challenge if we were to do a very short prep instead?
So the majority of people that would come to me from a different coach that is having not a great experience in the middle of prep, that's usually where I'd get them at, like, say 16 or 12 weeks out. And so the challenge there would be, usually it's coaching process, because coming from someone else, they haven't had structure, they haven't had routine, they haven't had a lot of communication. And so now I get this person who hasn't had a lot of that, and I'm probably going to have to change a lot of this, like the systems and probably training and cardio and like food, right? So now you're trying to create a new foundation in the middle of prep, right? Where 12 weeks is pretty close, because that's basically about 10 weeks out. If you have a couple weeks in there for a buffer. I don't recommend doing if it was someone that was just like walking off the street and was like, hey, I want to do a 12-week prep. It would have to be a very, very special individual that is already a high level competitor, that has a really low like body fat level already, and is like executes at a really high level, in order for them to be able to pull it off in that short period of time. But for the majority of the population, it's really not, it's not a great idea to do that short of a prep. You're going to run into a lot of issues, especially if you are like, unless you are ridiculously lean already. You're and the timeline's just too short, and you're likely not going to make it to stage being conditioned. You're basically going to run the gauntlet.
Yeah, yep. What are your thoughts about certain things that I wanted to ask you? So when we're working with a competitor, it doesn't have to be female necessarily, but what are your thoughts about managing or restricting certain things, like working at a specific amount of fluid intake per day or sodium intake per day, or a specific sort of meal plan? Do you rather control their meals, or you are more than happy for them to have kind of like a quote unquote macros and flexible diet? And I ask this from the standpoint of standardizing the data for you to have better ability to predict what the client, or how the client responds to certain things, especially to know what to do when designing the protocol closer to peak week or things like that. So what is your approach around limiting and managing these kind of things during prep and closer, maybe just say 4 weeks out of the show? Fiber intake, sodium, fluid, and even like anything to do with like artificial sweeteners and things like that.
So you said it exactly, just with it's like the control portion, right?
Hmm.
So it's like we want to make everything basically like Groundhog Day. I mean, I've definitely had some people who, for a certain period of time throughout to the beginning of their prep, we will do macros. It's very individual though, right? So if this is a person who has the ability to manage macros really well, so that they still are having relatively good food sources, and they're still keeping carbohydrate sources and like good choices that are more nutrient dense, and then also just with fiber too, so keep being able to keep like dietary fiber up. But moving closer to prep, like closer to show day, especially once food starts to evaporate and you don't have a lot, and you're having to move to like create volume in your food, like, with green fibrous vegetables, or swapping potatoes in instead of rice because of the larger volume. I find that if someone is wanting to do macros, there's too much fluctuation in like the GI bulk, right? So either that, or because they're trying to satiate cravings, they're choosing foods that are more calorie dense, lower volume, and it's creating far too much hunger that they can't manage because they're not using those lower calorie, like higher volume foods. So if it's someone who is really good at doing macros though, there I usually don't have an issue with it for the, the beginning part of prep. But the other part is towards the end is we're starting to devise a plan to see how someone responds to food from an aesthetic point of view. And so if you have someone that is constantly varying the quantities of food and the different kinds of food, then you're going to have skewed visuals as well when they're sending check-in photos. And we also are, at a certain point, we're getting people to, take photos after they train after having a certain amount of, carbohydrates and fluid and sodium. And so we're devising the plan for show day.
Okay.
So, and we want it to be foods that they respond to well, that it's not going to cause issues with digestion, right? And so that we can just cruise into show day knowing exactly, this is where they look, what their weight, where they look best, and how did we get that? And it was this amount of food and water and sodium. Yeah.
How do you agree or disagree with removing or maintaining things like artificial sweeteners during not necessarily so during prep, because that might not mean or have a much impact on the physique, but more so closer to show day? Let's talk about peak week, for example. Are you someone who rather to get this client to have a very limited range of foods and very limited added things such as artificial sweeteners or added salt, or even controlling for fiber intake? Let's say I don't want you to go over 25 grams per day of fiber a day or something like that.
So if we're talking about artificial sweeteners, um, like when it comes to Splenda, usually I'll have the discussion about Splenda is totally fine as long as you're not using 50 packets of it a day. And I
Yeah.
say this because there are people who have done that. That is additional calories, right?
Mhm.
So if you have someone who is already, sitting at like 135 pounds and then they have 800 or 900 calories, at the end of a prep, adding 150 calories from sweetener is a lot of added calories, right? But artificial sweeteners, it's as long as it's not causing any digestive issues and it's not racking up a whole bunch of extra calories, then there isn't any reason. Like if someone has used it through their entire prep, then why would you pull it?
Yeah.
And it's same with diet soda. So there are some people towards the end of prep that the carbonation can cause digestive issues. So in that instance, it's not the artificial sweeteners, it's the carbonation. So we would just pull it, right? So it all just depends on the response. Sodium, we want sodium all the way through, and we want the same sodium level all the way through. Sodium is incredibly important. And even on like peak week, or not peak week, but like the day before the show and the day of the show, we might increase sodium somewhat depending on how that person responds to sodium. And then water, we just want it to be the same, right? So it's like some people are thirstier than others. Some people run hot. Like for me in prep, I'm drinking like 8 or 9 liters a day. But it's because if I'm doing a lot of cardio, I'm sweating a lot as well. So I need to replenish that. And then I'm going to need more sodium or electrolytes. So it's just, usually will say like, let's do a gallon of water. If they drink more, let's just keep it consistent at what that number is. And then once we get to like peak week, water usually stays the same. We don't do water loading, and we don't, and it's not like we pull water at a certain amount of time. We've already got that figured out, how much water that person needs in order to have that look.
I agree.
So
Now,
yeah.
regarding fiber, do you tend to manage or fluctuate fiber prescription across peak week, or do you feel like if the client is having no issues whatsoever, then why'd you change it? But perhaps if they eat more than, let's say, 25 grams, there is likelihood they may show some level of bloating or some food like they have more a slow digestion, so they will still hold on to some like tummy volume. So
Yeah.
what is your approach when it comes to fiber management, prescription during peak week?
So with peak week, like I still get people to eat to have dietary fiber in. It's usually like try and get 50 grams of green fibrous vegetables with the majority of your meals. And it's like if we start like because lots of people will increase their fiber because they're eating a huge amount of green vegetables. And it's just something that we have to watch that they aren't ending up with digestive issues. We stay away from cruciferous, so no broccoli, no cauliflower, no cabbage because they're gas forming. So we just don't even want to go there. And so it's usually for me, it's the day before the show, I pull all the green vegetables. So they'll have them peak week up until the day before the show. And then we
Okay.
take the green vegetables out so that we get rid of that bulk. But it's important for them to have it in order to keep GI function and GI motility.
Yeah.
So,
Do you
yeah.
tend to rely or think that sometimes it may be necessary to use laxative around some time during these preps where you're obviously eating less calories and potentially less food that you would have in a bulking phase or something like that. Some people may struggle with like just GI motility tends to fluctuate with metabolic adaptation and just
Yeah.
all your hormonal milieu just being trying to adjust to a deficit. What happens with these clients that actually tend to report like slow digestion, slow bowel movements? Is it something that you tend to work with them, recommend using some sort of like laxative or like stool softeners or something to get them moving? Or do you just try to increase their fiber intake and water or like play around those with those things?
So if we start running into like some digestive issues, especially with females, one, there are a couple things we look for, right? So is are they have do they have low stomach acid? So that's one of the things that can pop up. So we have to add in digestive enzymes. And then the other thing is downregulation of thyroid hormones, which can slow GI motility. So in
Mhm.
a natural athlete, of course, we can't really deal with that. I mean, unless they have go to their physician and their levels are low and they get a prescription for it, right? And so with that, I mean, there are some people that I work with that I've done multiple preps with them. So we know at a certain point, this is what happens. And so these are the things that have worked with them. But it's things like Senecot, right? That we can add in, or they have a history of having some problems with GI motility or like constipation. So it's like stool softener that we'll add in. We try, it's like, of course, the day before the show, if that happens, we don't want to be like adding anything orally because then what if we end up with like digestive distress? So it would be like suppositories or, for some people, just having coffee will get things moving too. So,
Okay.
and then it's also, I'm asking them too, how much, because of course it's like food's pretty boring towards the end of prep and there isn't a lot of it. And so, how much water are they drinking when they're having their meals? Are they like scarfing them down too because they're so hungry? So it's like getting them to like turn their phone off, don't be in front of a TV, eat slowly, chew your food, use a small spoon so that you like a baby spoon. Don't drink a liter of water with each meal because it dilutes stomach acid and it can cause digestive issues. And then also, what are you doing after you eat? Are you going and like flopping on the couch or are you just like, can you go for a 5 or 10 minute walk just to keep digestion going?
Okay. Do you have any sort of like different approach if you were to work with, let's say, a vegetarian or vegan athlete compared to someone who just generally tends to gravitate for like meat or like less, obviously, there is less processed food when we tend to work with like clients that eat whatever and all type of meats and sources of protein. But it becomes a little bit of an extra challenge when we're working with vegans or vegetarians that they're having a very limited amount of potential protein sources that they go to, and the majority of the protein sources that we see nowadays that provide a little bit more wider range of protein tend to be a bit of like more ultra processed type of meats that they are not necessarily like just grab a piece of meat and put it on the pan. There's like these meats that have been just somehow made up to get them to provide some sort of like higher profile protein. And unfortunately with that comes that they have a higher calorie density cost and also sodium added to it. So what sort of things have you found with, if you have worked with this type of clients, any sort of challenges around working with a vegan or vegetarian and like pulling off the extra sodium or extra water or making sure they actually getting ready optimally?
So I actually don't work with vegans or vegetarians. It's just something that I've decided. For me, it's just far too difficult. And so, and it was just something I decided that, you know what, it's not my niche. I will find someone else that does a better job because it would be very challenging for me and it is not my forte. So one, I have a hard time understanding it at the same time, right? Especially just as a competitive athlete, right?
Yeah,
It's like you have now chosen to paddle upstream with one oar, right? So you
it's
have
definitely harder.
like prep is difficult. And then also to add being vegan or vegetarian would make it even harder. So yes, I think that Luke has worked with some vegetarian clients. So when you get him on another call, ask him.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Now, another question that I had for you is, so when we think about dairy, say things that contain some lactose, milk, probably cottage cheese or these kind of things, do you find that this may have an impact on how the client looks for show day if they were to have some of these sort of like high lactose content foods? Do you tend to pull it off, or for you it's like, nope, no problems whatsoever?
Once again, it's the individuality thing. So if
Yep.
someone doesn't respond well to dairy or lactose, then I'll pull it. But I mean, I have lots of people who eat Greek yogurt with whey protein mixed into it with fruit all the way up to their show, right? I mean, it's protein, it has some carbohydrates if it fits the plan and it's something that they enjoy. That's one of the biggest things that I've found, even just for myself, like through all of my years of competing. Like I started competing in 2008, and it's like I look back at like the coaching that I had and the plans that I had, and I'm like, I don't even know how I managed to like ingest the stuff that, like, it was terrible. There was nothing there was nothing satiating about it, and it wasn't. I didn't look at my food and go, "Oh my God, this is good," and start salivating. I think that there has to be an element of that in people's food, because that also aids in digestion, and they're going to be more compliant if they, like, most people are fine with eating like protein and vegetables and a carbohydrate source that's, it's pretty boring, but I'll try and keep something in at the end of the day or their post workout meal, so that we can keep cereal and, like something like that in, or Greek yogurt with cereal and fruit, or so that it still kind of feels like they're having a treat, and it's something that they look at and they're like, "Oh God, I can't wait for that meal," and it
Yeah,
tastes good.
I
So
totally think that that's sustainability and somehow making some options that the athlete is still looking forward to makes a little bit of a difference in the journey. And you don't want to make the journey like all suffering or like all as difficult as it can already be. If you can make some exceptions or make some adjustments so at least certain aspects of it are more enjoyable, that's something that as a coach you can make a huge difference in their especially if we're thinking about someone who's doing this for the first time. I guess there's this expectation that, or maybe perceived expectation, that all preps are going to just be so freaking hard and horrible that only few people can actually do and stick with the journey of doing more preps, because I guess the first experience may dictate whether you want to keep doing this, whether you just don't want to do it anymore. Like in my case, for example, this is the first time I'm doing a prep, and I waited about 10 years in order to be able to feel ready, just
Yes.
because it was all these fears that you see, and like expectations, because everything that you see around you, the hunger, the rigidity, the amount of exercise and exertion that you have to have on a regular basis, despite being totally depleted, fatigued, exhausted, sleep deprived, and pushed to your limits to a point where it's actually very unsustainable, but you keep doing it anyways. So if you can make these things work out without the extra suffering, that would probably make a huge difference, especially if you want to make the most out of the first experience. So then you just start getting better at it. So you repeat. And I guess this is a very common question that I would ask you is, do you feel like first time competitors, when they decide to not do any more preps because of the experience they had, they are shooting themselves short or on their foot because they just didn't give themselves enough time to actually do it again and get a better sense of what it looks like to do it a second time? The more you do it, the better you get at it.
Yeah, and for sure that, I mean, honestly, there are some people that just aren't mentally there to do it, right? So they don't have, it's not that, a lot of the times it's just they're not in the right place in their life to do it, right? So I think, from prepping, you realize that every day in order to reach your goal, you have like, I'm just going to say there's these 5 things that you need to tick the box on every day, and that's the priority. If you tick those 5, then they're going to help you progress. But those 5 things require all of your focus, and they can take up a lot of time, and especially closer to the end of prep. So, but there's some people who they're not willing to only focus on those things. They still like all the other stuff. They still like the social life. They still like staying up late. They still like, going out with their friends. They want to have flexibility in food. And I think with that, it's just they aren't really sure about why they're competing in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
They don't really don't have clarity on why they're doing it or what their intention is. It's like, if it's just something that they just want to try out, it can be really hard for people to, you know, do the tunnel vision and just focus on those things and say no to other stuff. And I mean, there's always going to be hunger, there's always going to be sacrifice, there's always going to be days when you are incredibly tired and depleted, whether it's your first time or if it's your, 17th time. It's just that's how it is. I think that the first few times you do it though it's like our perception of it is like it's way harder and it's like way more awful because we haven't experienced that before, as opposed to the second, third time it's like, oh, I remember this and I remember surviving, so I'm okay,
Yep.
right? And I think it's also whoever you're coaching with, it's just having that communication to say like, this is normal. Like this is, and if you have someone also that is a newbie, that's someone that probably does need extra time because there are going to be hiccups. right? So there probably are going to be some times where they emotionally can't handle it and they eat off plan, or they, decide to not do cardio because they're too tired. Or, like a number of those things are probably going to pop up. So you're going to need to have more buffers in there.
When it comes to thinking about that specifically, what are some of the things that you tend to encounter or strategies that you tend to implement when you have these hiccups along the way? For example, let's say the client, they just binged and they went over 800 calories of their macros. What do you tend to recommend? Would you say, let's just move on and back on track? Or let's actually account for this extra amount of calories and distribute it throughout the week. So we have to you have to pay this off. Like you can't just make this go away and you, like expect to have fat loss progress if you're not in the deficit that we estimated you to be at. So what would be your approach? And I guess this answer will depend as well on how long have you got for show day and how ready are you, how lean you are. But overall, like what would be your first response to this excessive amount of calories that were overeaten in a day or so?
Give me 1 second. I have to hit my camera again. Amazing how fast half an hour goes by.
Especially when it's so interesting, the conversation.
Yeah. So usually what I'll do is if someone has an episode where they binge, it's like, I'm going to jump on a call with them and let's unpack why this is happening,
Mhm.
right? So if someone has been, okay, is this an athlete that this is happening repeatedly? Then we maybe have the discussion that it's like, maybe this isn't the best option for you. Like, let's figure this out. If you have someone who's relatively compliant and like everything's going really well and then they have a big binge, it's like I need to figure out, so why did this happen? There can be a few things that could could exacerbate this. It could be that they need a deload, right? And they did need a bit of a refeed and they just haven't communicated to me that, usually when we start to see things slide. So it's like when I used to have Google spreadsheets that I would do for check-ins, I could see if like, and actually it's something I pay attention to in Kahunas too, is if someone is usually gives me tons of information in their check-in, and then all of a sudden it starts to like trail off and there's like one word answers. And it looks like their energy level is decreasing and their performance in the gym and their motivation to train is starting to tank. And it's like lots of times I will kind of catch that and I'm like, hey, how's like day to day? Like, are you irritable with people? Is it hard to like fold your laundry and put it away? Like normal, easy things are becoming difficult. So I'll see if that's happening. And it could be that just we need to like pull back for 3 days, half cardio. They might need a few extra carbs for those days, right? It's just like a mini deload. Or so is it that, so here's a good example of a male client that I have who he has two smaller children and he was on the weekend. So he works Monday to Friday, super busy, crazy regimented, very compliant. On the weekend, when he was doing stuff with his family and his kids, he was like eating their snacks. And he was like, and so what we did is I just reduced his calories throughout the week because he was very compliant and he could manage hunger. And I gave him more food on the weekend. So it was like the total calories at the end of the week that make the difference. So that way he was just totally compliant. He had his extra like 250 calories or whatever it was on the weekend that we figured out he was overeating on the weekend. And so we just did that. And that worked for him. So
Okay.
it's having just that communication with the person to say, like, I can give suggestions and this might work and this might work, but it's like really it's collaborating with the person for them to figure out what can I do so that it doesn't happen again. Or if they start to go down that road, it's like oh, if this happens, then we have the skills built in so that they recognize that it's starting to happen. Either it's like they call me or they text me, or it's like we have a backup so that if I feel like I'm going to go off the rails, I have a Ninja Creamy in the freezer.
Perfect.
Or, it's things like that.
Okay.
It's not
And
me
in the
yelling.
same, sorry to interrupt, but in the sense that we have this same scenario that the client is sort of like a little bit more flaky or a little bit more, you just see that something's off. For you, what makes you decide whether a deload is appropriate or maybe a diet break is appropriate? What do you go for first? Maybe a deload is best and keep the deficit, or maybe a diet break and keeping the training hard. What would be your like the difference between like the sign for you to say this is better for this client versus the other?
So if it's like if they're not recovering from the gym, like so it's like a recovery thing too. If it's like I'm so sore, all of my metrics in the gym are going down, then of course it's like, okay, let's back off of training. Let's train at like 2 or 3 reps in reserve, something like that. If it's like they say that when they do cardio, their legs feel like concrete and it's like their heart rate is like jacked at like level 5 when normally they're at level 7 and their heart rate is like 130. If it's something that's continuously reoccurring with food, then if that's something that is we like is happening multiple times and it's impeding their progress, then usually that's when I like we have to have a discussion about you only have this much time, this is what's happening, and this is the goal. Do we need to extend the timeline
Yeah.
until we get this figured out? Like, do you need to have 2 weeks off? And then we look at after 2 weeks and then we figure out, okay, is this worth moving forward with? We always call it, Luke and I call it the come to Jesus talk.
I think it is interesting because what has happened to me, and I don't know whether that has happened to you with clients, is there is a lot of like a psychological, it's a bit of a psychological game as well. So it may be that you just need to see that you could have like a wild card to pull off if you needed to. And what happens sometimes, that happens with my personality. I'm a bit of a rebel kind of person. And when I get told that I have to have this very limited amount of calories or I have to hit these numbers because I just get super overwhelmed. But if you give
Yeah,
me that, but on top of that, you say, you can also know that you have the option to eat at this amount of calories if you needed to, or you can just do lower volume on this week. And for some reason, it's just like, I don't think I need that. And I'm actually not going to use that wildcard. And I am more compliant and I'm
yeah,
much more adhered to what I'm supposed to do versus if you just gave me the low and the rigid plan and no wildcards, then I become non-compliant. It's just weird. It's like a psychological thing that happens to me. And I've seen this repeatedly in clients as well. It's just knowing that you have something that you could use, but because you don't want to, you you sort of like you don't want to use it to get off plan. It seems to help you to stay accountable and compliant. I don't know. Has that happened to you at all?
well, so for me, my personality is Luke has to reel me in. I'm like, I just want I will do extra and I will do whatever he says. I'm like, it doesn't matter. And he's like, you know, you can't like sometimes I've gone like rogue and he has to reel me in with like, oh well, I just did extra cardio because I felt good. And he's like, you can't do that because then it doesn't where we're at right now doesn't give me the true response of, what we have RX'd if you keep going rogue. Or I've pulled food from myself before too because I'm like, I just want it now. I want progress to be faster, but I'm being very subjective. It's like running on emotion because I think that I could do more, right? As opposed to if he thought that I needed to do more, he would tell me to, but it's me being like super like, no, I just have to do it. So that's kind of how I operate. But what I find with some people is when you get to that place too where maybe food is low, cardio is high, and they're kind of on the struggle bus, what I'll do is I'll say, look, we're just gonna gas pedal for 3 more days. You just have to do this for 3 more days. And then we're gonna pull back and I'll give you a refeed. And then they're like, oh, just 3 more days. And they're like, you're sure it's only 3 more days? And I'm like, yes, 3 more days. And like my refeeds are not like go eat a burger. That's not. It's like they get extra carbs.
Yep.
Maybe they get a little bit of extra fat, right? But it's mostly that it's like rice or potatoes, things like that that they already have in their diet that we know doesn't bother them, but I just feed them more carbs. And so, and I mean, depending on the person, sometimes they can do sushi, right? Depending on who they are, how lean they are, blah, blah, blah. But I find that if you give the person that picture, it's only 3 more days, or it's only like 1 more day, and then we're gonna pull back, then usually they'll make it through.
Okay. How do you manage clients during prep that they have a vacation or holiday in the middle of prep? And let's say they have, I guess, something that they probably cannot modify that much. Let's put my case again. I'm doing prep, but I have to travel to the US because I have an event that I have to be in. Like there's no way for me to say, hey, I'm in prep and I can't attend because I can't mess up with my prep. So this will happen with clients as well. They have to travel because of work, or there's something in the middle of their prep that has to be addressed when it comes to traveling, or maybe it's just a holiday they had planned for a year and a half ago, but they also decided to go into prep. How can you manage or work through travel in a holiday and still somehow get it right to be ready?
So I've traveled almost every year to Mexico on vacation in prep. So if it's vacation, usually what I will say to them is, and it also depends on how far out they are from their show, right? We don't want to
Mm-hmm.
be going on vacation 6 weeks out, right? Probably not a good idea. So that's the whole timeline thing. If we know that there's a vacation in there, we'll probably just make sure that we're like in a good spot to have that vacation. We build the timeline around it. But if they're going on vacation, what I'll recommend for them is they rent a place that they have their own kitchen that they can make their own food. So there is some planning ahead, depending on how long they're gone for. Like I have one client who competes in 4 weeks and she travels quite often for work. So she goes away on the weekend. Usually what we'll do is, depending on what gym equipment she has, or if she's going to be really busy with work, we'll kind of like, I'll just pull her training while she's gone, as long as she gets her steps and her cardio in, then that's fine. Like it usually, when she comes home, it hasn't held her back any. She takes all of her food with her as well. There's also like, I'll recommend meal prep services that you can like customize your food, your macros, and you can have it shipped to wherever you're going. I think that it's more about just having the discussion with the person to make sure that we have a plan in place around, okay, how are we going to deal with staying on track with food? Do you have a gym and can you still train? And can you get steps and cardio in? And I mean, if they're still like 20 some weeks out of their show and they're doing okay, it's really not that big of a deal, right? But
Do you consider a
um
diet break in that case, or not necessarily
but I think that it all depends on where their
where they are?
their physique is and how far out they are. So there might be that it's like, okay, so for this period of time you can do macros, what I find for a lot of people when they go on vacation is that they have less stress, they get more sleep because they're not working, they get more steps in and more activity because they're like walking and they're seeing, doing sightseeing, or they're walking on the beach or riding bikes or doing activities. So usually step count and activity level isn't an issue. And I've had people that have come back and they've made a lot of progress while they've been on vacation.
So
So,
the big thing would be not going free for all. Let's say you go on a cruise, or you have like you want to mentally have a bit of more relaxed time because you're on vacation. Then you get these clients that they just want to not track or just go more relaxed with food. So in that situation, what would you recommend? Do you tend to recommend, okay, it's fine if you don't track, but stay mindful, or you gotta track, you gotta weigh your food? What is the level of strictness and rigidity they have to have even on holiday?
well, once again, if they're in prep, it's like I wouldn't ever say to them, don't track. Like just do whatever you want. Likely is not a good idea. I mean, if you have, the thing is you don't want to be eating in a caloric surplus. So, because then you come back and what if you're 10 pounds heavier? That's like what? That can be 10 extra weeks to get that off.
Yeah.
If you look at rate of loss, right? I mean, 2 pounds a week is like an aggressive weight loss. Most people average like, and especially, I mean, towards the front end of prep, we're going to see like a higher rate of loss, but still 2 pounds is still a lot. And so even if they have a 2 pound loss a week, that's still 5 weeks that now you've gone backwards. So I think it's like talking to them about, sure, if you want to go away, or if you're going on vacation, or if you have to travel, then it's still, you can, it's like we still need to have close to 100% compliance if you want to continue to continue progressing in the right direction.
How important for you is the ratio of carbs, fats when you're aiming for macros? So your client is not following a meal plan necessarily, but they just working with macros, and their non-negotiable is protein and hitting calories. Is that too much importance to hit a certain ratio of carb fats? Supposedly, we know the benefits of having more carbs and fats for performance, for the performance point of view, and like being able to recover and train harder. But how big of a priority is that ratio versus hitting calories and protein and make sure this client is dropping body fat in the right direction?
Well, we want to keep protein at a certain level too, just for retaining lean mass, especially when you're
Correct.
diet. And it's satiating, right? So we want to keep protein high when it comes to carbohydrates and fat. So the thing with that is carbohydrates are really important for recovery in especially when you're in a deficit. So I really try to keep carbohydrates around training. So a good amount before, a good amount after, and even having a bolus at bedtime so that it can aid in recovery and aid in their sleep.
Mm-hmm.
So so with that, it's like sometimes fat gets down to incidentals, unfortunately, at the tail end of a prep. I try and keep them as high as I can for as long of a period of time as I can. But I mean, essentially we want to have more protein and more carbs. I don't like taking people to the point where they don't have any carbohydrates.
Mm-hmm.
It does happen, but usually it ends up that we're carb cycling more than anything. And there are definitely instances, and this more so with enhanced athletes, where I will pull protein calories and I put them into carbohydrates so that they have more carbs. Like if someone's sitting at 225 grams of protein and we're starting to get down to the nitty gritty with carbs and they really don't have a lot left, I'll take, I'll pull them to like 175 grams of protein and take that and put it into carbohydrates.
Yeah.
Because one, they're just going to perform better and they're going to feel a lot better as well.
How common for you, or maybe let me rephrase this question. So you mentioned carb cycling. How important, or what is the effect of using carb cycling during prep, or let's say closer to in the latest stage of prep? What is the carb cycling meant to be doing or affecting the client in order to see better or worse results?
I mean, it's basically just creating more of a deficit. And then
Yep.
we're putting carbohydrates back in so that they don't die. Let's just put it that way. It's more of like it's
Cycling calories, would it be the same thing?
yeah, except for I mean it's the carbohydrates is definitely going to have more of a psychological impact on them as well,
Yeah.
right? So that's what I mean when I was talking about I'm like you just have to do this for 3 more days and then we'll add more carbs. So
Okay.
it's just to drive fat loss. Because you look at so where do we drive a deficit when we're in a contest prep? And a deficit is driven by nutrition, right? We reduce calories by cardio, and then also by non-exercise activity is where the majority of the deficit is driven. Training doesn't drive a deficit, right? But what happens is when you start to deplete carbohydrates, performance in training starts to go down, intensity will go down, and then we need to get that back again because we're needing to
Yep.
train at that intensity in order to retain lean mass. But
Correct.
we still need to get to the point where we need to get that last, and this is usually happening at the end where we're needing to pull off that last bit that is like really stubborn.
In that situation, beyond driving calories down, because you just need to create a further deficit while still maintain the energy output the way it is, or the way it's been mostly the entire prep, and you're just playing with the input, which would be the calories. Are you saying that mostly this is going to be driven by manipulated carbohydrates, potentially fats? You can't, I guess you can, but not so much that it gets to a very minimal amount that may affect even more the production of hormones. But what would be the minimum amount of grams per kilogram, or maybe in your case, grams per pound of body weight for fats to be like the minimum? So then the only thing that you can lever out is carbohydrates. So that's the only thing that you can basically put from 0 to 200, or play with that so much that is going to be driving the deficit by the end of the day, because you don't want to play too much with protein, and you don't want to change the volume or the training, because that is what is preserving your lean body mass and keeping you as fit as possible and conditioned as possible. So obviously we have just very limited points where we can actually play with and drive that deficit. But in this situation, how low can you go with fat intake? So then that's another one that you get to a point where you no longer can modify it anymore, and then it's all about carb cycling and carb adjustments.
It's not unusual to get down to the only fats that we have are coming from even just having chicken breast
Mm-hmm.
incidentals. So we're not adding any dietary fat, right? So
Yep.
there's no peanut butter, there's no nut butter, it's just what we have coming from. And a lot of the times towards the end, it is down to it's just chicken breast, ground turkey, like 99.1 of turkey, right? 99 lean, 1% fat. Um, and we're trying to find as many lean protein sources that have as low fat as possible. So, and I mean, this also depends on the person, and really it just comes down to, um, trying to reduce calories as far as possible. I mean, I can give you myself as an example with the leanness that I need to get to for WPD, and I am an unideal client. That's probably how Luke would describe me. Um, I get down to 700 calories with 90 minutes of cardio. Well, 70. I've been at 90 minutes of cardio. Um, and I don't have any fats. So it's like I like cod. So I'll eat a lot of cod because I like it. Cod and ground chicken and vegetables and like rice and potatoes and some fruits in there too. But and some oats, but Like really, that's like I get down to nothing. And it's usually for like probably the last 6 weeks. So it's not like the entire prep. It's just I get to that point where it's like, in order to get that last bit off, this is just what we have to do. And it's not uncommon. Like I have
Okay.
some guys that are, get low. So ultimately, it's really nice to keep people no lower than 30 grams. If we can keep 30 in.
Yeah. I don't even get to 30 sometimes. I think I have the habit to just go more for carbs and be very low fat. I don't add, like, the one only thing that I would add as extra fat would be avocado. And this is just when sometimes I have a sushi or a like Japanese roll or something that will just require me to have some sort of avocado in there,
Yeah.
but not even like salmon or like higher fat sources that can just come out as being healthy, but they just contain way too much fat and obviously calories that probably will just limit the quantity and the volume that I am aiming for. So I have another question for you. So are you currently prepping for a show?
Yeah, so I haven't really talked about it much because it wasn't supposed to happen this year.
Okay.
So this year I was going to take it off and focus just on coaching and business. But what has happened is I don't have a lot of clients that are competing this year because the majority of them are in a growth year, improvement year. So I have like 10 people competing this year. And then I'm looking forward to next year and I'm looking at timelines of clients and I'm like, well, I was planning on doing North Americans in Pittsburgh, August next year. And I'm like, I have 3 people that are possibly going to do that show. I can't do it, right? So I was like, well, then this was like March, no, end of March. I was like, well, I could just give her now and maybe make maybe make it for North Americans this year, which is in August. Talked to Luke about it and I'm like, it's too tight because I have travel coming up and just other stuff. I have a vacation this summer planned. So he's like, well, why don't we just do November? So then now you're 30 weeks out. I'm like, okay, let's do it. So 30 weeks, so we're doing fat loss up until July, and then I have a family vacation where I'll take a bit of a break. And then as soon as family vacation is done, then I'm back into prep in August, and that'll go until November. So, so a long prep, but I think that it'll be good because the majority of my preps have been like 24 weeks
Okay.
in the
And are you
past. So
planning and are you planning to do how are you planning to approach your travel on your vacation? That we were already speaking about this actually. Are you planning to give yourself like a diet break and just give yourself like a maintenance calories for that period of time you're going to be out? Or would you be calorie cycling a little bit and maybe just a few days while I'm out, I'm still going to aim for a deficit and maybe some higher days? How would you approach your nutrition going away?
so we're like I'm going to Corpus Christi. I'm going to like the coast in Texas. Actually, Luke is going to be there, so my coach will be with me, but it's more than likely we'll just have our own place, so we'll cook our own food. What I usually do in circumstances like that is if we're planning like to go out for dinner or something, I would like choose the days that we're going to go out and kind of plan around it. And then just for the majority of the day, um, the rest of the day, just eat like my plan or eat macros. So I like even right now, I just follow macros.
Mm-hmm.
I basically eat the same thing every day,
Yep.
minus like moving a few things around. So going there, I'll be just making my own food. I'll likely just stick to macros. So it all depends on how much I progress over the next however many weeks leading up to that vacation with what strategy I will use while I'm there.
Okay.
So if I progress really quickly and everything and I'm in a good spot, so the plan is I need to be about 144 pounds for
Mm-hmm.
state. and I'm sitting at 170
Yeah,
pounds.
that's a lot.
So, so, and that's fasted. So 144, 145 is going to be fasted weight. So it's not fed. And then sorry, someone's coming to, I have mattresses that we're selling and someone just came to pick them up. So what our plan was is to get me to around like 160 by by the end of June, the beginning of July. And then I have that bit of a break. And then that way, then I only have like maybe 15 pounds to go from there.
Okay. Wow, that's very interesting. Are you competing in like a figure? What sort of division are you planning to participate?
So I compete in WPD. So women's physique. So no heels.
Oh,
So I'm like the one
physique.
level, yeah, one
Okay.
level below women's bodybuilding. So higher
Okay.
muscularity. Yeah. So the plan is to do a qualifier in Texas, maybe a couple weeks before the pro qualifier. And the pro qualifier is a master's pro qualifier in Anaheim, California.
Okay. I have two more questions. I let you go.
Yeah.
I have just been bombarding you with so many questions, but these
Okay.
two are more related to shows. So when it comes to picking your show, and maybe you're not too sure, like you're a first timer, you're not too sure where you're gonna end up really. Like initially, like in my case, I thought that my physique was really good for wellness, but now that I'm getting leaner and leaner, like I'm so small. I'm super skinny. I don't know whether I'm actually going to be really good fit in a wellness category, but I've been working towards being wellness. So just like, do you just go and see what happens? Or can you actually try and register for bikini, like different divisions for the same show? Is that possible? Is that appropriate? What do you think about that? Like envisioning a first timer thinking that they will be working towards a specific division, but they end up not having the physique they needed it for that particular division.
So I mean, that happens a lot for first time competitors, and they'll come to me and they're like, well, I want to I want to do figure. And, we start to diet them down, and it's like, oh, yeah, you're not big enough for figure. I mean, usually we can tell ahead of time, but especially for females when it comes to like wellness bikini in an off season for someone who is curvy and has like, a more muscular lower body. I think that first time, like I do have a lot of first time competitors that have gone and they've just put themselves in bikini and wellness to see what, and just for judge feedback, or just to see if they like just the difference, right?
Okay.
And then it's like from there, judge feedback, then it's like they might say you should stay in bikini, you have the structure for bikini, or no, with like a couple years growth you'll be really good in wellness. I mean, your coach should be able to tell you that too. They should be able to look at you and go, I think you're going to fit here better right now. I mean, bikini is always the starting.
Hmm.
And if you look at if you were to look at the Olympia pro stage at bikini wellness figure, all of the female divisions, so that's the standard. That's what they're judging on, right? Is because so if you look at a bikini girl, and bikini girls are a lot more muscular than what they used to be. It's
Hmm.
ridiculous now.
Yeah.
And wellness girls, I mean, good Lord, like they're like centaurs,
Yeah.
right? Like the amount of muscular development in their lower body is it's insane. And then figure is like giant too. But so it's like I think it's your coach having an honest conversation with you too, to say, I think you're gonna, if you want to do wellness, yes, you have the structure for it. You're not there yet. Start with bikini. See what the prep process feels like. See what it like. How conditioned can we get you, and like let's see how things transpire. And then from there, it's like, okay, you love the process, you want to move to wellness, then let's put our heads down and make a plan for you to grow into wellness.
Okay. does that mean like, do you need to stay natural if you want it to be a natural wellness, or do you always feel like that wellness to be that big and that successful, you have to go enhance from where you're at?
Well, it's the end goal. So what is your end goal? Is it you want to step on the Olympia stage as a pro?
Oh,
Then
me?
but you know what I mean, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah,
like, so you always have to look at like what is the goal and what's the timeline, like how long, like what's the person's age, how much time do they have left competing? And I mean, for a lot of women, they haven't even reached their glass ceiling as a natural because they haven't put in enough time in improvement seasons and a surplus training effectively.
yeah, yeah.
Right?
So my very, very last question, and I'll let you go, I promise you, is how expensive can actually become enhanced? Because it is it is not very much discussed. Okay, you just have to take some extra PEDs and a few things, but what goes into going enhanced? You gotta measure, like if you want to do it properly and safely, you're gonna measure and have some lab tests done a few times during your prep and after in the building season and everything else. You gotta source for these PEDs. You want to have that on a like in the cycles and everything else. You want to have someone who is expert in that to guide you along
Yeah.
that, on top of all the cost that prep involves. The food, if you're in a building season, you will have to eat more food, so that is even more expenses. All the clothing, the like the suits and everything else. So overall, like
Mhm.
if you were just to spit out some numbers in average, how expensive can go enhance be?
So are you talking about like just when you first choose to move into enhancement, or is it
Yep,
just like, so I guess like one of the things that often that people don't think about or don't have a discussion about is we kind of have to be looking at, okay, well, one, it's like the whole age thing. How long are you going to be enhanced for? Right? So it's like if you're still planning on competing for 5 years, you have to look at the cost of everything that happens along the way that would cause downregulation of hormones and basically put you into menopause many times throughout those years, right? So it's like if you become enhanced, and of course with you at first, you're going to have to pay for the cost of a coach that is educated in peds. So I mean that's looking at like anywhere from $350 to $500 a month if you're going to have a coach that is knowledgeable and is going to have the discussion with you and educate you about everything, right? So there's your coaching fee. But then it's like you talk about like what the level of risk is with this person and where are you starting them. And so, if you look at what HRT is going to cost, so say you get labs done and we need to optimize your natural hormone or your endogenous hormones first. And you have to have an HRT clinic do that. So it could be $1,000 there just for the blood work, the onboarding, the consult with the physician, and then you have your medications on top of that, right? More than likely, if you're requiring HRT at that point, and like you have still the menstrual cycle, so being on HRT is still considered enhanced. You're no longer a natural athlete, right? So, so then there's that cost. So then now, if we're talking about we're adding anabolics, so we're adding like Masteron or Primobolan, something like that. So these are the things that causes like a downregulation of the HPO axis, which is going to cause amenorrhea. Like now you're not ovulating, you're not having a cycle, right? So you do that. How many months do you not have a cycle for? And then once you show it, and then you go through a contest prep. So PEDs aren't expensive. Lab work is, and the supplementation that you need to take to offset any negative health detriment are expensive. Metformin, telmisartan, like anything like that. And then, liver health, kidney health, all of the over-the-counter supplements can sometimes be $300 a month. right? So then from there, you go into a contest prep. You're still paying for your coach. Your food is expensive. Um, the cost for your show. So if you enter into one category, it's like what, 275 for one. So if you're going to do true novice, novice, and then one like bikini, that's like what, like almost $1,000 for your registration. $275 for hair and makeup, $275 for a tan. If you buy a suit, it's going to be anywhere from like $600 to $1,000. If you rent one, it's probably going to be $250 or $300. The hotel, the travel, shoes, if you're wearing shoes, are going to be $150. Posing, coaching is going to be $50 an hour, $50 a session, $100 a session, depending on who you hire. And then post show, you come out of like post show, and then it's like recovery, and then making sure that you're having labs done again, which sometimes cost $300 or $400, and that's 8 weeks following. And then it's like, okay, so now where are we sitting at baseline hormones? And then we work towards getting menstrual cycle back again. So, and it's like the longer we don't ovulate, the more detriment we have later on. So if you're young and you move into enhancement, and then it's like the cost of ovulation, so that you might hit perimenopause early. And now you're dealing with all of those issues. So that's a cost. I always think of that as a cost. And it's
Yeah.
something that you have to think about. It's not just tunnel vision, see the stage and see like just like those shows that you do. You have to think about the cost of what that does to your body when you're doing it repeatedly for however many years, because that can get expensive later in life.
So in summary, for like, if we were to create a figure for a monthly figure, would you say that that takes you about $2,000, or like
Or I mean, I should have written it down on my whiteboard, but it's like, yeah, I mean,
like
it's probably more than that. It's like it depending on like travel and hotels or Airbnb and all of that stuff too. It's like it could be like $5,000 to $8,000.
yeah, if we were to think for the entire prep, let's say a 20-week prep, then you could say, well, this is probably going to cost you, looking at all these numbers adding up all the way until 20 weeks, probably $20,000, $30,000 or more. And if we were to divide that like by 20 weeks, you're saying like per week would be about $1,000 or so.
Yeah, I mean I mean it's the coaching and the food and like over the counter supplements
Yeah,
that are going to cost the most.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
the peds themselves are not expensive, especially for females, because we don't use much.
yeah. Wow. Guys, if
Right?
you want to go enhance, you gotta be rich.
Well, and I mean, there's definitely ways that you can offset cost. I mean, do your own hair and makeup, learn how to do that. You don't have to have your nails done. They're not judging you on your nails.
Yeah.
Right? Like, learn
Oh,
how to do
thanks
your own
God.
makeup, do your own hair. I don't ever get my nails done for a show, because I'm like, if they're judging me on my nails, then I'm here for the wrong reason. You can rent a suit, you can borrow a suit, right? Same with shoes. I mean, you can probably even get secondhand shoes.
Mm-hmm.
Posing, coaching. I mean, you could just buy an online course if you needed to. Like, there are definitely ways to do it a little bit less expensive and do it on a budget. But what I find for the majority of people is, one, they don't have enough money to do it, and that causes stress in the prep. And then they
Mm-hmm.
aren't keeping track, and they're just like any, and then there's like the whole shopping thing that happens too, the dopamine chasing towards the end when you can't eat anything, and you're not, you don't have any dopamine hits, so people will start to online shop and buy stuff.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, what is the price you get from like winning an overall? Obviously, that's going to depend on the level of competition that you're doing. It's not the same as competing in the Arnolds, that just your national, regional NPC competition you will do. But like beyond just the pride of you winning, if you went to be the overall winner, what else can you get? Advertisement, like net, like business interest from other sponsors, like obviously things like that can come around, but like, do you actually get in return like a good ROI in return for all the things that you're putting into the prep?
Most shows don't have, unless you're a pro and you win first, second, or third in a pro show. And even then, the women's prizes are absolutely atrocious.
Mm.
If you look at
So
the
it's,
Olympia and the Arnold, the women get crumbs and the men get like $500,000 and the
oh,
women get
so
like
it's not the
30
same.
and the women get 30, something
Oh,
like that.
fuck.
Yeah, it's bad. And so at regional shows, you might get like a swag bag full of supplements, a trophy, a sword. Like you really, it's like you don't you don't win a lot there. I know that there are some shows. I think that there are a couple in the States where they give you, you're like sponsored by a supplement company for a year with certain products,
Mm.
but there usually isn't any money.
So this is just mainly passion and love for the sport, basically, and because you
I
like
mean,
to look shredded.
yeah, and it's like doing it. I mean, a lot of people do it because it's a challenge and they want to look a specific way. And I mean, in certain cases, I mean, I like it in when my athletes bodybuilding makes them better in all areas of their life, right?
Mm-hmm.
There should be carryover.
Yep.
Um, and I think some people do it because they're coaches, so they want to get to a certain level so that they can learn in order to be able to coach people effectively. You know, you look at John, how much he competed beforehand in the trenches. He wouldn't be able to provide the education that he does if he hadn't done all of that competing leading up to. Same with
Yeah.
Luke. And
Yep.
same with
Yep.
me, all of my experiences. So,
Absolutely.
and um but I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's like, I mean, most people are like, oh, I want to be a pro, which is everyone wants to be a pro, but no one wants to put in the work to do it, right? No one actually realizes what it takes, but that's usually the goal. And at a regional level, that's the first step, right? You have to go to a regional show, and then from there, you go to a national stage, which you should be much improved for a national stage, right? When you win it, and then you win a pro card, most people, it's like 2 or 3 years until their pro debut.
Mm. Okay.
Yeah.
Jamie, this has been so great conversation. I apologize if it went way over what we expected it to go, but I
Okay, I
think
don't mind at all.
there's so much rich information that people are going to benefit from, and like all these different little things that I know a lot of women and athletes wonder about, and even for coaches. This is just a wealth of knowledge and information from experience, from coaching, from you being an athlete as well. This has just been amazing, and I appreciate you. You're awesome. And yeah, is there anything beyond the competition that you're going to be prepping for coming for you?
No, I don't think so. It's been like head down, be the best coach that I can be for all the athletes with the merging with no switch in J3. It's been, it's been very busy, and which I'm incredibly grateful for. It's very surreal for me, especially as a female, for me to say I'm a J3 coach. Like I work with John Jewett and Luke Miller, and like I stand on the shoulders of giants, basically, right?
That's amazing.
And I mean, just as a female, it's like there aren't many of us within the bodybuilding community that coach at a high level. And so every day I wake up and I'm like, yep, this is real. Like I actually do this, right? So, and I mean, I appreciate you having me on as well. It's, I mean, I remember like I've followed you for a long time, long before I even worked with like No Switch. And it's this for me too, is I'm like, oh my God, I'm on Astrid's podcast. Like, what's going on?
That's so
So it's
you deserve so much, girl. You're doing a really amazing job, and I know there's much more credit you deserve that you actually perhaps feel and give yourself credit to. And so I really want to acknowledge you and just praise for everything that you're doing and that you are able to change more life than you think you're doing already. So keep going, girl.
well, it's just we just need to keep supporting each other, right? It's so important for us as females to put out quality, like science backed, evidence based information because there aren't enough females doing it, right?
Mm,
I'm not going to leverage my physique and to try and get more followers. I want people to come to us because we put out legitimate information because we're
yep.
intelligent, right? So that's like a really big thing for me, even just with like social media. I don't have a ton of followers, but the platform that I do, I want to educate people. So
That's amazing. Well, I'm gonna let you go. I know it's late for you over there. Have a great week, and I'll let you know when this is ready to be launched. I probably will cut this in two parts, but I'll see how that goes in the editing and what makes sense. But this is gonna be amazing. Thank you again for everything, girl.
very welcome.
Mwah. Have a beautiful night. I see you very soon.
Yeah.
Bye bye.